Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm joined today by Russell Fagan, who you're essentially the guy who's running KE Arms.
Well, in this case, I'm the, of the many hats I wear, I'm the Polymer Receiver Program Manager at KE Arms.
So a lot of people, in the wake of the KP15 coming out, asked about other things like a 308 receiver. There's not really enough market demand to justify a 308, but you guys decided that there was enough market demand to justify a 9mm Glock magazine.
Correct. So we've been offering our KE9 Glock Mag billet aluminum lower for about 5 years now. Okay. So we have sales data backing up how many units of those get sold every year in sales spike periods like we had over the past year. So we thought it was worth it to move forward with a polymer version of the 9mm variant.
Okay.
So we took a lot of the things we learned about doing these polymer receivers with the KP15, basically grafted our 9mm magwell onto the front of it, and made some other changes to accommodate the ambi mag release for the Glock, because it is left and right hander friendly, while also maintaining the structural reinforcements we need in the polymer.
Makes sense. Why Glock mags? There's MPX mags, there's lots of mags you could choose from. Glocks are not necessarily the best magazine choice, are they?
Commercially though, they tend to be, because they're widely available and they're relatively inexpensive. If you start going to things like the MPX or Scorpion magazines, they'd require a dedicated proprietary upper that would allow the magazine to seat high enough to feed. So the Glock mag is skinny enough that it can work within existing AR-15 dimensions, and to make something like the polymer receiver economically viable, you got to sell enough of them that are compatible with existing parts. So if it had to have its own dedicated billet upper, that really limits the marketability of it.
So this is compatible with what 9mm uppers? If someone just gets the low,
most standard blowback uppers will work, but you need to make sure you have a bolt carrier that's machined to clear through the feed lips of a Glock magazine. Because, for example, the original Colt system, which was a double column, double feed magazine, the part of the bolt that pushes the rounds into the chamber is wider. So if you want to use a Glock magazine, you have to have that area of the bolt cut narrower. There are combination bolts on the market now that work with both, but there are also a number of Glock magazine cut bolt carriers on the market as well.
Okay, so you've got your competition rifle there that you've been shooting for a while. I have my demo KP9 with no optics on it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, and let me show you guys some of the internals, because there's actually more to a 9mm lower than just putting a 9mm bolt in the gun, and there's some interesting stuff going on there. Then we'll come back and do some shooting with Russell's gun here at the 2-gun match. I should clarify first that what KE is actually making is just the lower assembly of this 9mm carbine. They're not actually selling a complete gun. That said, what we have here does have a few differences from a standard lower. Looking at this from the top, of course, the open magazine well area is way smaller, and they have basically just filled the whole back section here, made it solid polymer, because of course you want to move the magazine as far forward as possible, and the magazine for 9mm is much shorter. Once you open it up, the most obvious difference is this big old shark fin here. That is the ejector. On a regular 5.56 AR-15, the ejector is actually built into the bolt. It's that plunger right there. As soon as the cartridge clears, or the empty case clears the chamber, that plunger pushes the case off to the side and kicks it out of the rifle. But 9mm versions typically don't use a system like that. They have instead a cut here for a fixed ejector. And the reason that KE has these two screws here is so that you can adjust the positioning and the angle of this ejector to fit a variety of different bolt cuts. So what we're using right here is a bolt from TACCOM. We also have a barrel from TACCOM, which I'll show you in a moment. It is different than a regular AR bolt in a few other ways as well. The 9mm carbine is simple blowback, so it doesn't have a separate bolt. The bolt face is machined into the bolt itself. Being simple blowback, it also doesn't need the gas system. So, but it does need to have this lug to keep the bolt aligned and upright, and so it's just got sort of a figure 8 shaped lug there that's screwed down into the 2 holes that you would normally use for the gas block there. In order to make it heavier, there is a weight that's pinned into the back here. Again, because it's simple blowback, it's the only thing holding it closed is the mass of the bolt, and so you need a bit more in there. But the hammer recess is identical to a standard AR bolt, so the fire control group can be exactly the same. You will also notice that the rib on the bottom of the bolt here is a lot narrower on the 9mm version than it is on the standard 5.56. That is because the 5.56 is designed specifically to fit a double feed AR-15 style magazine. Well, Glock magazines are single feed, which is to say there's only the cartridge that's being fed is always in the same position in the center of the magazine, and that standard AR bolt is too wide to feed through the opening in a single feed Glock magazine. The 9mm bolts, however, are narrower enough to allow this to happen. So the bottom of the bolt here pushes the cartridge out of the magazine and then feeds it up into the barrel. And speaking of the barrel, one of the neat things here with TACCOM's barrels, which is what Russell and I both used for our carbines, they have a feed ramp at the bottom here, but they also have this feed ramp at the top. And that's because the feed angle and the overall length of 9mm are such that it's not uncommon for a round to get pushed up towards the top of the barrel, which is something that doesn't really happen with the geometry of 5.56. So that feed ramp on the top will help push rounds down and feed them properly into the chamber. But back to the receiver. So that's why you've got this adjustability in the ejector. It's also worth pointing out that the ejector acts as the over-travel stop for the magazine. So the hook on the bottom of the ejector there hits the top of the magazine and sets the height for it. KE is a big fan of ambidextrous controls, and so they included an ambidextrous mag release as a standard thing on the KP9 receivers. So we've got one on the left side here and one on the right, and you can see they work together. So that's set up for the appropriate magazine catch area on a Glock magazine right there. The other controls are really up to you, mainly the selector, the safety. I have an ambidextrous one in this case. And lastly, the buffer is pretty much standardized, uses the same buffer components as a regular AR. So that's pretty much it on the KP9 lowers. It's largely this ejector, which does a number of things, and the different geometry of the magazine. Well, everything from there back is identical to the 5.56 KP15. So from there back, same as the 5.56 receiver.
Shooter ready?
Ready. Both low, but
stand by.
So low you have to
Hit. Hit.
Well, watch how he does it.
Hit. 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 Please. I don't know what's hard about that. Stand by. Hit. Hit. Hit.
Okay, couple frequently asked questions. What about a Cmmg rotary delay system? I want to put that on my KP9. Can I?
You'd have to customize it to a large degree to make that work. From what I'm told, talking to Cmmg, the height of the magazines is different, and you'd have to also remove or modify the ejector in the KP9. The ejector serves as the overlimit travel for inserting the Glock magazines, and it also helps control the angle of feeding too. So you'd have to somehow modify that ejector to still retain those features, but clear the radial delayed bolt.
Okay, so maybe, but probably not.
Right. If you're going to do that on a polymer lower, we recommend using the KP15 with their PMAG conversions.
That makes sense. Next question, buffer. Like there's 1,000 different buffer configurations. What actually works here?
So the KP9's shipping with a 5.4 ounce buffer. That's the minimum weight to not damage the lower with a blowback system. But for example, I'm using hotter S&B ammo here today, so I'm using a 8 ounce buffer with a 308 buffer spring. And that changes the handling so that the bolt carrier is not bottoming out as hard, if at all, and results in less muzzle jump.
Makes sense.
But if you're using the lower pressure ammunition, it may not run reliably with it, period.
My wolf, my tool ammo.
Right.
Okay.
So we send them with the 5.4 ounce buffer because we assume people are probably going to use cheaper ammo if they want to tune it to work with their particular type of ammo. Whole lot of different buffer weights, whole lot of different spring weights available to do that.
Okay.
And then one final note about last round bolt hold open. People ask about that all the time with the Glock magazines. It doesn't work unless you get a upper with a linkage system. Like Gibbs, New Frontier, and Arrow are all making uppers with linkage systems that have a little thing that interfaces with the follower on the Glock magazine and links to the bolt catch and makes it function as the gun is fired. The bolt catch is still here if you don't have that, so you can manually lock it open for administrative things like showing clear and loading your first magazine. But to have that feature function while you're firing, you have to get a specific upper.
Okay, which is not on the KE arms, the KP9 specifically.
Correct. Okay.
All right, well, cool. And where can people find these?
On kearms.com, and Brownells is going to be retailing them as well.
Awesome. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. It was a lot of fun to come out here and do some shooting, and I'm looking forward to actually getting an optic on mine and doing some more shooting with it myself. Compare it to some of the other PCCs that we have in the stable. So, thanks for joining us, Russell.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for watching.